The first breath of prairie wind carried the scent of sage and dust, as the stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Whitetail Creek's only hotel, leaving Grace Fairchild clutching her single carpet bag and fighting back tears that threatened to spill onto her travel-worn cheeks. Spring of 1875 had brought nothing but hardship: the loss of her parents to influenza, the foreclosure of their modest Boston home, and now her arrival in this remote Wyoming territory to marry a man she'd never met. Owen Westbrook stood apart from the small crowd gathering around the stagecoach, his weathered Stetson pulled low over eyes that had seen 32 hard years on the frontier. His tall frame leaned against the hitching post as he searched for the woman whose letters he'd read by lantern light these past 3 months. The advertisement he'd placed in the Eastern paper had seemed practical at the time. A rancher needs a wife, especially with 200 acres and a growing cattle operation. What he hadn't expected was the way Grace's careful penmanship and thoughtful words had stirred something in him he thought long buried. As passengers disembarked, Owen straightened his posture. The description she'd provided: chestnut hair, green eyes, and of average height, could match any number of women. Then he spotted her, standing alone after the other travelers had been greeted by waiting family or business associates. Her shoulders trembled slightly beneath a navy traveling coat that had seen better days. "Miss Fairchild," he called, approaching with measured steps. Grace looked up, hastily wiping away a tear with her gloved hand. "Mr. Westbrook," he nodded, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. Up close, her eyes weren't merely green but flecked with gold, currently rimmed with redness that spoke of recent crying. Her journey had clearly been difficult. "Welcome to Whitetail Creek," he said, awkwardly extending his hand before thinking better of it. Instead, he reached for her carpet bag. "May I?" "Thank you," Grace whispered, relinquishing her only possession. The pitiful weight of it struck Owen immediately. Everything she owned in the world fit into a single small bag. "My wagon's just over there," he said, gesturing toward a sturdy buckboard with 2 chestnut horses hitched to it. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch." The silence between them grew heavy as they walked. Grace stumbled slightly on a rut in the street, and Owen instinctively caught her elbow to steady her. The brief contact seemed to break something inside her, and a fresh wave of tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she gasped, fumbling for a handkerchief that wasn't there. "I don't mean to appear ungrateful. It's just been a long journey," Owen finished for her, producing his own clean handkerchief from his pocket. He handed it to her without comment, giving her the dignity of collecting herself. "Thank you," Grace said again, dabbing at her eyes. "I'm afraid I've arrived with nothing of value to offer you, Mr. Westbrook. My circumstances." Her voice trailed off. Owen studied her face for a long moment. Despite the tears, there was a quiet strength in her bearing, a resilience that spoke of a woman who had faced hardship before. "Seems to me you came with tears, Miss Fairchild," he said softly, "and that's honest enough. The rest—" He gestured toward the open country beyond the town limits. "Then we'll build smiles together." The simple statement, spoken without flourish or pretense, gave Grace pause. She looked at this tall, serious man with new eyes. His face was sun-browned and creased at the corners of his eyes, suggesting he smiled more than his current demeanor indicated. "I won't make promises I can't keep," Owen continued as he helped her onto the wagon seat. "The ranch is modest, the work is hard, and luxuries are few, but there's good land, clean air, and no one will go hungry." As he climbed up beside her and took the reins, Grace found her voice again. "I didn't come expecting luxury, Mr. Westbrook. I came hoping for a chance to begin again." He nodded, clicking his tongue to set the horses in motion. "Then we have that in common, Miss Fairchild." The wagon pulled away from town, heading west into the golden afternoon light. The vastness of the landscape unfolded before them, rolling prairie dotted with sagebrush, distant foothills rising to meet mountains that seemed to touch the endless blue sky. To Grace, accustomed to Boston's crowded streets and tall buildings, the openness was both terrifying and exhilarating. "It's beautiful," she whispered, almost to herself. Owen glanced at her, surprised. Most Easterners found the untamed wilderness daunting rather than beautiful. "It can be harsh," he cautioned. "Winters are long, summers hot. Spring brings flooding, autumn brings fire danger." "But it's honest," Grace replied. "Nature doesn't pretend to be something it isn't." A ghost of a smile touched Owen's lips. "No, it certainly doesn't." As the wagon rolled along the rutted trail, Grace gradually composed herself. The steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels created a soothing backdrop to gather her thoughts. "Your letters mentioned you've been ranching here for 8 years, she ventured. Owen nodded. "Came out after the war. Worked as a ranch hand for the Sawyer spread until I'd saved enough to stake my own claim." "You fought in the war between the states?" Grace asked carefully, knowing the conflict still left raw feelings for many. "Union cavalry," Owen confirmed. "Enlisted in '62 out of Pennsylvania." He fell silent for a moment. "Lost my brother at Gettysburg." "I'm sorry," Grace said softly. "My father lost his leg at Antietam. He never fully recovered." This shared understanding of loss created a small bridge between them. Owen's posture relaxed slightly as he guided the horses around a bend in the road. "Your letters mentioned you taught school in Boston," he asked. Grace nodded. "For 3 years before." She swallowed hard. "Before my parents fell ill. After their passing, the school didn't renew my position. They preferred unmarried teachers without family obligations." "Their loss," Owen said simply. "We have no proper school here yet. 10 or 12 children scattered among the ranches who get schooling when their parents can manage it." Hope flickered in Grace's heart. "Perhaps someday I might teach again." "Perhaps," Owen agreed. "Though ranch life keeps everyone busy, especially during calving season and roundup." They lapsed into silence again, but it was more comfortable now. Grace found herself studying her future husband's profile. His jaw was strong, his nose straight but with a small bump that suggested it had been broken once. Dark hair curled at his collar a bit too long, as if haircuts were a luxury saved for special occasions. "There it is," Owen said eventually, nodding toward the horizon. Grace followed his gaze and saw a collection of buildings nestled in a small valley. A modest 2-story house constructed of sturdy logs formed the centerpiece, with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings arranged nearby. A creek lined with cottonwoods cut through the property, their pale green leaves shimmering in the afternoon light. "Whitetail Ranch," Owen stated with quiet pride. "Named for the creek that runs through it. Not the biggest spread in the territory, but the water rights are solid, and the grazing land is good." As they drew closer, Grace could see details emerging, smoke rising from the house chimney, chickens pecking in a fenced yard, washing hung on a line between 2 posts. Signs of life, of domesticity in this wild place. "Someone's there?" she asked, suddenly nervous at the prospect of meeting others so soon after her arrival. "My ranch hand, Pete Simmons, and his wife Eliza. They live in the small cabin beyond the barn." "Eliza's likely made supper for us," Owen explained. "They've been with me 5 years. Good people." The wagon rolled into the yard, and a weathered man with a silver-streaked beard emerged from the barn, followed by a border collie that barked once in greeting. "That's Pete," Owen said, pulling the wagon to a stop. "The dog's ranger." Grace straightened her skirts as best she could, wishing she'd had a chance to refresh herself before meeting anyone. Her hair had partly escaped its pins during the journey, and her face felt gritty with travel dust. Pete approached the wagon, removing his hat. "Welcome back, boss," he said, then turned curious eyes to Grace. "Madam." "Pete, this is Miss Fairchild," Owen said, climbing down from the wagon. "My intended." The slight hesitation in Owen's voice reminded Grace of the awkwardness of their arrangement. They were practically strangers, yet within days they would be husband and wife. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Fairchild," Pete said, offering a nod. "Eliza's been fussing with the house since sunrise, getting everything ready for you." "That's very kind," Grace replied, finding her social graces despite her exhaustion. Owen came around to help her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, and she found herself blushing as her feet touched the ground. "I'll show you the house," Owen said. "Pete, could you see to the horses?" "Course," Pete replied, already moving to unhitch the team. Grace followed Owen toward the house, taking in everything with wide eyes. The building was larger than it had appeared from a distance, constructed with skill from hand-hewn logs chinked with what looked like a mixture of clay and straw. A covered porch wrapped around two sides, furnished with simple wooden chairs. Wildflowers grew in a small fenced garden to one side, their colors bright against the weathered wood. "It's not what you're used to," Owen said, misinterpreting her silence for disappointment. "No," Grace agreed, then quickly added, "it's better than I imagined, so solid and permanent." Something in Owen's expression softened. "Built it myself with help from neighbors. Took 2 summers." Pride colored his voice. "The inside still needs work, but it's dry in the rain and warm in winter." He opened the door and gestured for Grace to enter first. The main room served multiple purposes: kitchen, dining area, and sitting space all combined. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, currently hosting a small cooking fire over which a pot simmered. The furnishings were simple but well-crafted: a sturdy table with 6 chairs, a cushioned settee, and 2 rocking chairs positioned near the hearth. "Mrs. Westbrook, is that you?" called a female voice from somewhere in the back of the house. Before Grace could correct the assumption, a woman in her 40s appeared, wiping her hands on an apron. She was plump and pleasant-faced, with graying brown hair tucked under a kerchief. "Oh," the woman exclaimed. "Pardon me, miss. I'm Eliza Simmons." Her eyes darted between Grace and Owen. "I've been getting things ready, though there's still so much to do before the wedding." "Mrs. Simmons has been a great help," Owen said. "Eliza, this is Miss Fairchild." "Grace, please," Grace offered with a smile, instantly warming to the woman's motherly demeanor. "You poor dear, you must be exhausted," Eliza clucked. "Come sit by the fire while I pour you some tea. Supper's almost ready, just a simple stew and fresh bread, but it'll put color back in those cheeks." Grace allowed herself to be guided to one of the rocking chairs, gratefully accepting the cup of tea Eliza pressed into her hands. The warmth seeping through her gloves was comforting after the long journey. "I've aired out the spare bedroom upstairs," Eliza continued, bustling around the kitchen. "Put fresh linens on the bed and hung some curtains I made last month. It's small, but it should serve until—" She trailed off, glancing at Owen. "Until the wedding," he finished for her. "Which we should discuss, Miss Fairchild, when you're rested." Grace nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. In Boston, the arrangement had seemed straightforward, a practical solution to her desperate circumstances. Now, faced with this man and the life they would build together, the enormity of it pressed down on her. "The Reverend comes through every 3rd Sunday," Owen explained, taking the seat across from her. That's in 4 days. But if you need more time, 4 days is sufficient, Grace said quickly. To delay would only prolong the awkwardness between them. Better to embrace her new life fully and without hesitation. Owen studied her face carefully. You're certain? I don't want to rush you. Grace met his gaze steadily, despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. I'm certain, Mr. Westbrook. I came here to be your wife. Delaying won't change that purpose. Something like admiration flickered in Owen's eyes. Very well. 4 days it is. Eliza beamed at them both. Then we have preparations to make. I'll speak with the ladies from neighboring ranches tomorrow. It won't be fancy, but we can make it proper. As Eliza continued planning aloud, Grace sipped her tea and let her gaze wander around what would soon be her home. Despite the simplicity, care had been taken in its construction and furnishing. Books lined a small shelf near the fireplace, well-worn volumes that suggested they were read often rather than displayed for show. A handmade quilt in blues and reds draped over the back of the settee. Through a doorway, she glimpsed a desk covered with papers, ranch accounts, perhaps. When supper was served, Pete joined them, and conversation flowed more easily than Grace had expected. The Simmonses were curious about Boston, asking questions that allowed Grace to speak of her former home without dwelling on painful memories. Owen remained mostly quiet, but Grace noticed how he listened intently to everything she said. After the meal, Eliza showed Grace to her temporary room. It was indeed small but scrupulously clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand with a pitcher and bowl. It's not much, Eliza apologized, but the master bedroom is larger. That's where you and Mr. Westbrook will. She stopped, blushing slightly. Well, after the wedding, of course. This is perfect, truly, Grace assured her. Thank you for making me feel welcome. When Eliza departed, Grace unpacked her meager belongings, 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a nightgown, a worn Bible that had belonged to her mother, and a small photograph of her parents in a tarnished silver frame. The sight of her possessions laid out made her tears threaten again. Everything she had in the world wouldn't fill even half the dresser. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, Owen stood in the hallway, holding her carpet bag. You forgot this in the wagon, he said, handing it to her. Thank you. Grace took it, their fingers brushing briefly. Owen hesitated, then said, I want you to know that I meant what I said earlier about building something together. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise to treat you with respect, to work alongside you as a partner. The sincerity in his voice touched Grace deeply. That's all anyone could ask for, she replied softly. He nodded. Get some rest. Tomorrow I'll show you around the ranch. After he left, Grace changed into her nightgown and sat on the edge of the bed. Through the small window, she could see stars scattered across the night sky, more than she'd ever seen in Boston. The vastness of it was both terrifying and comforting, a reminder of how small her troubles were in the grand scheme of things. For the first time since her parents' deaths, Grace felt a flicker of hope. Owen Westbrook might be a stranger, but he was a man of principle. This place, wild as it was, offered the chance for a new beginning. She would build a life here day by day, moment by moment. As exhaustion finally claimed her, Grace's last thought was of Owen's steady gaze and his simple, honest words. Then we'll build smiles together. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the soft murmur of voices from downstairs. Grace dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a simple blue cotton with minimal trim, and pinned her hair in a practical style. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror above the washstand was pale but composed, the redness around her eyes mostly faded. Downstairs, she found Owen and Pete at the table, discussing the day's work over coffee and flapjacks. Both men stood when she entered. "Good morning, Miss Fairchild," Owen said. "Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," Grace replied, though in truth she had woken several times, disoriented by the unfamiliar sounds of the countryside coyotes calling in the distance, the creaking of the house as it settled, wind rustling through the cottonwoods. "Sit, sit," Eliza urged, appearing from the kitchen with a plate of flapjacks. "You need a good breakfast. Ranch work starts early and doesn't end until sundown." Grace accepted the plate gratefully, realizing she was genuinely hungry for the first time in weeks. The flapjacks were light and golden, drizzled with amber honey that Eliza proudly announced came from their own beehives. "I thought I'd show you around the ranch today," Owen said as they ate. "Unless you'd prefer to rest another day." "I'd like to see everything," Grace replied eagerly. "If I'm to be useful, I should understand how things work here." Owen's expression warmed slightly. "Most women from the East take time to adjust before diving into ranch work." "I'm not most women, Mr. Westbrook," Grace said, then worried she sounded too forward. "What I mean is, I'm not afraid of hard work." "Never thought you were," Owen replied. "And please call me Owen. Mr. Westbrook makes me feel like my father." "Then you must call me Grace," she responded, pleased by this small step toward familiarity. After breakfast, Owen led her outside. The morning air was cool and crisp, scented with sage and pine from the distant mountains. The sun had just cleared the eastern ridge, casting long shadows across the yard where chickens scratched for insects. "I'll start with the basics," Owen said, guiding her toward the barn. "We run about 200 head of cattle, mostly Herefords with some Longhorn mixed in. The herd's up in the north pasture now, but you'll see them soon enough." Inside the barn, the sweet smell of hay mingled with the earthier scents of horses and leather. 6 stalls lined one side, 4 of them occupied by horses who nickered softly at their approach. "This is Dusty," Owen said, stopping at the first stall where a dappled gray horse stretched its neck over the gate. "He's my main riding horse. That black mare is Storm, and the chestnut is Copper. The bay is Eliza's horse, Penny." "They're beautiful," Grace said, cautiously reaching out to stroke Dusty's velvety nose. The horse snuffled against her palm, making her smile. "Do you ride?" Owen asked. Grace shook her head. "I never had the opportunity in Boston. We kept to carriages in the city." "I'll teach you," Owen promised. "Every rancher's wife needs to ride. It's not just practical, it's freedom. When you're on horseback, you can go places a wagon can't reach." The thought was both exciting and intimidating. "I'd like that," Grace said. They continued the tour, with Owen explaining the workings of the ranch in detail, the calving shed where new life arrived each spring, the small blacksmith forge where he made basic repairs to tools and horseshoes, the smokehouse where meat was preserved. He showed her the garden plot where Eliza grew vegetables, the chicken coop, and the root cellar dug into the hillside. "The creek provides water year-round," Owen explained as they walked along its banks. "Never runs dry, even in the worst droughts. That's what makes this land valuable." Cottonwoods lined the waterway, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. The sound was soothing, almost musical. Grace trailed her fingers in the clear, cold water. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. Owen looked pleased. "We're fortunate. Some ranches have to dig wells that go dry in summer, or haul water for miles." As they walked back toward the house, Grace gathered her courage to ask a question that had been on her mind since she arrived. "Owen," she began hesitantly, "your advertisement mentioned wanting a wife to help with the ranch. I understand the cooking and cleaning part, but what other duties will you expect of me?" Owen considered her question carefully before answering. A ranch wife does a bit of everything, depending on her skills. Eliza helps with calving and lambing when we need extra hands. She keeps the accounts since Pete never learned his letters proper. Some women garden, preserve food, make soap and candles, tend to sick animals. He glanced at her, gauging her reaction. But I don't expect you to know everything at once. You'll find your place here in time. And Grace hesitated, then pressed on. What about children? A flush crept up Owen's neck. I hope for children, yes. This is a good place to raise a family. But he cleared his throat. That's something we can discuss after the wedding. Grace nodded, grateful for his tactful response. They walked in silence for a moment before she asked another question. The nearest town is Whitetail Creek. How often do you go there? Once a month for supplies we can't produce ourselves, Owen replied. More often during shipping season when we're moving cattle to market. It's small general store, hotel, saloon, blacksmith, church that doubles as a schoolhouse when the circuit teacher comes through. And the nearest larger town. Cheyenne's about 3 days' ride. We go twice a year for major supplies and to sell cattle. It's growing fast since the railroad came through. The mention of the railroad reminded Grace of how far she'd traveled to reach this place, nearly 2,000 miles from everything familiar. The vastness of the country between her past and present lives was daunting. Owen seemed to sense her thoughts. It's isolated here, he acknowledged. That's hard for some folks. If you find it too difficult, I won't, Grace interrupted, more firmly than she intended. I made my choice when I boarded that train in Boston. Owen studied her face, then nodded. Fair enough. They completed their circuit of the ranch, ending at the small family cemetery on a rise overlooking the house. 3 simple wooden crosses stood within a wrought iron fence. My parents and younger sister, Owen explained quietly. They came west with me after the war. Cholera took them all in '68, just a year after we settled here. I'm sorry, Grace said softly. Loss was something they shared, a common ground in their otherwise different lives. It's the way of things out here, Owen replied, though his voice held old pain. Life is beautiful but harsh. You have to take the good with the bad. As they walked back to the house, Grace found herself studying Owen more closely. He moved with a natural grace that came from physical work and comfort in his surroundings. His hands, she noticed, were calloused but clean. The nails trimmed the hands of a man who worked hard but took pride in himself. Most revealing were his eyes, deep brown with flecks of amber, guarded but kind. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity as Grace began learning the routines of the ranch. Eliza showed her the kitchen garden, explaining what grew well in the Wyoming soil and what struggled. She demonstrated how to work the cast iron cookstove, a temperamental beast that required constant attention to maintain the right temperature. By evening, Grace's head was swimming with new information, and her muscles ached from unaccustomed activities. After supper, she sat in one of the rocking chairs by the fireplace, too tired to even rock, simply watching the flames dance. Owen entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He offered one to Grace, then took the other chair. Overwhelming day, he asked. Grace accepted the coffee gratefully. A bit, but in a good way. There's so much to learn. You did well, Owen said. Eliza says you're a natural with the chickens. Usually takes people weeks to get those hens to cooperate. The simple praise warmed Grace. I used to help my mother with the neighbor's chickens when I was a girl. We lived on the outskirts of Boston then, before moving closer to the city center. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire and sipping their coffee. Outside, a coyote called, its eerie yip echoing across the valley. Does that sound ever stop being unsettling? Grace asked. Owen chuckled, the sound rich and surprisingly youthful. After a while it becomes comforting, means the world is as it should be. Grace considered this. I suppose that's true of many things that seem frightening at first, including marriage to a stranger. Owen asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. Grace met his gaze steadily. Yes, that too. Owen nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer. We should discuss the wedding arrangements. Reverend Johnson will be here Sunday morning. The ceremony will be simple, just us, the Simonses, and perhaps a few neighbors. That sounds perfect, Grace said sincerely. An elaborate ceremony would have felt false, given the practical nature of their union. Eliza's already spreading the word. In a place this isolated, any excuse for gathering is welcome, Owen continued. There'll be food after, music if Jenkins brings his fiddle. Will I need? That is, I don't have a proper dress, Grace admitted, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Eliza mentioned that, Owen said. She's arranged for Mrs. Miller from the next ranch to visit tomorrow. She was a seamstress in St. Louis before moving west. Says she can alter one of her daughter's dresses for you in time. Grace's eyes widened at this kindness. That's too generous. I couldn't possibly. Folks help each other out here, Owen interrupted gently. It's the only way to survive. Your turn will come to help someone else. The thought of being part of such a community brought unexpected tears to Grace's eyes. In Boston, after her parents' deaths, neighbors she'd known for years had turned away, fearful that misfortune might be contagious or that she might ask for charity. Thank you, she whispered. Owen looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. No need for thanks between us. We're partners now, or will be soon enough. The word partners resonated with Grace. Not master and servant, not even merely husband and wife, but partners in this venture of building a life together. As promised, the next day brought Mrs. Miller, a robust woman in her 50s with nimble fingers and a practical eye. She brought a cream-colored dress of fine wool, simply cut but elegant. My Sarah wore this when she married last spring, Mrs. Miller explained as she pinned the dress to fit Grace's slimmer frame. She's in Oregon now with her husband. Would please her to know it's getting another use. Grace stood still as the older woman worked, touched by the generosity of these frontier women. It's beautiful. Are you certain your daughter wouldn't mind? Mrs. Miller chuckled. Sarah has her hands full with twins now. Don't think she's worried about an old dress. She stepped back to assess her work. You're a pretty little thing. Westbrook's a lucky man, though he's too serious to admit it. Grace blushed. We hardly know each other yet. That's how most marriages start out here, Mrs. Miller said matter-of-factly. My Henry and I met 3 times before our wedding day. Been together 30 years now. She winked. Sometimes it's better to get to know each other after the vows. No pretending to be something you're not. The next few days passed in a whirl of preparations and learning. Grace tried to absorb everything Eliza showed her about running the ranch house, how to regulate the stove, where to store provisions to keep them safe from mice, which wild plants could be used for seasoning or medicine. In the evenings, she and Owen would sit by the fire, gradually sharing more of their histories and hopes. Grace learned that Owen had been the middle of 5 children, only 2 of whom had survived to adulthood. His older brother had died at Gettysburg, and he had a sister married to a shopkeeper in Pennsylvania whom he hadn't seen in 8 years. In turn, she told him about growing up as an only child, her father's work as a printer before the war, and her mother's skill with embroidery that had supplemented the family income during hard times. She spoke of her love for teaching and her hopes of someday continuing that work. The children here could use proper schooling, Owen acknowledged. Most can barely read and their figures are worse. Would be a benefit to the whole community. The idea took root in Grace's mind not just as something to occupy her time, but as a real contribution she could make to her new home. On the morning of the wedding, Grace woke at dawn. She bathed using the pitcher and bowl in her room, scrubbing her skin until it glowed pink. Eliza helped her dress in the altered cream wool, which now fit perfectly, skimming her figure without being too tight. Her hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style, adorned with a few wildflowers Eliza had gathered at sunrise. "You look beautiful, dear," Eliza said, stepping back to admire her work. Grace hardly recognized herself in the small mirror. The woman who looked back at her seemed both familiar and strange, the same features, but somehow more vibrant, more present than she had been in months. A knock at the door announced Mrs. Miller, who had returned to witness the ceremony. She carried a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "Every bride needs something borrowed," she said, revealing a delicate lace handkerchief. "My grandmother brought this from Ireland, been in every Miller wedding since." Grace accepted it with trembling fingers. "I'll take the greatest care of it. Just carry it with joy, Mrs. Miller replied warmly. By 10 o'clock, neighbors had begun arriving, ranchers and their families from properties within a day's ride. They gathered in the main room of the house, which had been transformed with wildflowers and ribbon streamers crafted by Eliza and the neighboring women. Reverend Johnson, a tall man with a booming voice, arrived last, his Bible tucked under one arm. Owen waited near the fireplace, looking uncomfortable but dignified in a clean black suit that Grace suspected was rarely worn. His hair was neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. When Grace entered the room, his eyes widened slightly, and a hush fell over the assembled guests. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Grace and Owen exchanged simple vows, promising to honor and care for one another in good times and bad. When Owen slipped a plain gold band onto Grace's finger, a ring that had belonged to his mother, he explained in a whisper the physical symbol of their union brought home the reality of what they were undertaking together. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Johnson announced at the conclusion. Owen hesitated only a moment before leaning down to press his lips gently against Grace's. The kiss was brief but tender, conveying respect rather than passion. Yet Grace felt a flutter in her stomach nonetheless, a recognition that this man was now her husband in every sense. The celebration that followed was joyous and boisterous. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food contributed by every family in attendance. Jenkins did indeed bring his fiddle, and soon lively music filled the air. Children played games while adults caught up on news and gossip, the kind of social gathering that sustained isolated communities through long periods apart. Grace was introduced to so many people that their names and faces blurred together. Everyone was welcoming, though she noticed curious glances and overheard whispered speculations about the Eastern bride and whether she would last through her first Wyoming winter. Throughout it all, Owen remained close by, a steady presence that Grace found increasingly reassuring. He wasn't demonstrative, no unnecessary touches or public displays of affection, but his attentiveness spoke volumes. When she looked overwhelmed, he skillfully steered conversations to more comfortable topics. When her feet began to ache from standing, he found her a chair. Small kindnesses that revealed the considerate man beneath the reserved exterior. As evening approached, guests gradually departed, mindful of long rides home. The last to leave were the Millers, with Mrs. Miller pressing Grace's hands warmly. "Remember, dear, marriage is like breaking a wild horse," the older woman advised. "Starts out scary, takes patience and understanding, but ends up being the most rewarding partnership you'll ever know." Grace wasn't entirely sure how to take this advice but appreciated the sentiment behind it. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Miller." "Sarah now," the woman corrected with a wink. "We're family in the ways that matter out here." When the last wagon had disappeared down the trail, Owen and Grace found themselves alone in the yard. The Simmonses had tactfully retired to their cabin, leaving the newlyweds to navigate this new intimacy on their own. "Would you like to see the stars?" Owen asked unexpectedly. "There's a good spot by the creek." Grateful for the reprieve from immediately facing the bedroom, Grace nodded. "I'd like that very much." Owen offered his arm, and together they walked to a small rise near the creek. The night was clear, the moon not yet risen, allowing the stars to shine in breathtaking profusion across the velvet sky. "I've never seen so many," Grace breathed, tilting her head back. "City lights dim them," Owen explained. "Out here, nothing gets in their way." He hesitated, then added, "My father taught me the constellations when I was a boy." "Would you like to learn them, please?" Grace said eagerly. They sat on a fallen log, and Owen pointed out the major star patterns: the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia's chair, the Belt of Orion. His voice took on a different quality as he shared this knowledge, more animated than Grace had yet heard it. "You love it here," she observed when he paused. Owen nodded. "Never felt at home anywhere else. The war showed me too much ugliness. Here, even when nature is harsh, there's a purpose to it, a rightness." "I think I could come to love it too," Grace said softly. Owen turned to study her face in the starlight. "I hope you will." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining with gentle pressure. "Grace, I want you to know that I don't expect. That is, I understand this marriage began as a practical arrangement, if you need time before we—" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. Grace's heart warmed at his consideration. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "But I believe in honoring vows completely. We are husband and wife now." Relief and something deeper flickered across Owen's features. He stood, helping Grace to her feet, their hands remaining linked as they walked back to the house, their home. The master bedroom was simply furnished with a large bed, a wardrobe, and a chest of drawers. Someone, likely Eliza, had placed a vase of wildflowers on the bedside table and turned down the quilt. Grace's traveling bag and few possessions had been moved from the spare room. The sight of her mother's silver-framed photograph now sitting on the dresser alongside Owen's pocket watch and comb struck her deeply tangible evidence of their lives merging. "I'll give you privacy to prepare," Owen said, stepping toward the door. Grace nodded gratefully. When he had gone, she changed into her nightgown with trembling fingers. This aspect of marriage had been only vaguely explained to her by her mother before her passing, leaving Grace with theoretical knowledge but practical uncertainty. When Owen returned, he had removed his formal suit jacket and tie but remained otherwise dressed. He moved about the room awkwardly, extinguishing lamps until only one remained lit by the bed. "Are you comfortable?" he asked, standing uncertainly by the edge of the mattress. "Yes," Grace answered, though her racing heart belied her words. Owen sat on the bed's edge, reaching out to take her hand. "I meant what I said by the creek. We have time. All the time we need." Looking into his eyes, Grace saw kindness, patience, and a flicker of desire held carefully in check. This man she had married was honorable to his core, putting her comfort above his own expectations. "I trust you, Owen," she said simply, squeezing his hand. The moment hung between them, fragile and significant. Then Owen leaned forward slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and kissed her. Unlike the brief ceremony kiss, this one lingered, gentle but thorough. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his calloused palm surprisingly soft against her skin. When they parted, Grace felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with awakening desire. Owen's eyes had darkened, but he maintained his careful restraint. "We're building something," he whispered. "Brick by brick. No need to rush the foundation." Grace understood his meaning. Trust and comfort needed to develop naturally between them. Physical intimacy would follow in its own time. That night, they lay side by side, not quite touching yet aware of each other's presence. Owen fell asleep first, his breathing deep and even. Grace listened to the unfamiliar sound, finding it oddly comforting. Before sleep claimed her, she reflected on the day's events and the strange path that had led her to this bed, this man, this life. She had arrived with nothing but tears, and found herself welcomed with unexpected kindness. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time in months, Grace felt hope taking root in her heart as persistent and promising as the wildflowers that bloomed across the Wyoming prairie. The weeks that followed their wedding saw Grace settling into ranch life with determination, if not always grace. Each day brought new challenges and small victories. She learned to collect eggs without being pecked, to churn butter until her arms ached, to identify which plants in Eliza's garden were vegetables and which were weeds. Owen proved to be a patient teacher when it came to riding. He selected Penny, Eliza's gentle mare, for Grace's first lessons. Despite initial fears, Grace found unexpected joy in mastering the skill, gradually progressing from nervous clutching of the saddle horn to confident posting at a trot. "You're a natural," Owen commented one afternoon as they rode along the creek. "Some people never get comfortable in the saddle." Grace beamed at the praise. "I enjoy the freedom of it. You were right about that." Their relationship developed slowly but steadily during these early weeks. By day, they worked separately, Owen with the cattle and fields, Grace with household matters, but evenings brought them together. They established a ritual of sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the western sky in spectacular colors while discussing the day's events. Physical intimacy evolved at a similar measured pace. What began as tentative kisses and cautious touches gradually deepened as they became more comfortable with one another. Owen remained considerate to a fault, always ensuring Grace's comfort before his own. In time, she found herself looking forward to their nights together, discovering pleasure she had never been told to expect. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching a thunderstorm roll in from the mountains, Owen broached a subject that had been on his mind. "The schoolhouse in town sits empty most days," he said, his tone casual though Grace sensed underlying purpose. "Reverend Johnson only uses it for Sunday services and the occasional visiting teacher." Grace set down her mending. "Yes. I spoke with some of the other ranchers at the general store yesterday. They're interested in having regular schooling for their children if a teacher could be found." He glanced at her. "If you're still interested in teaching, that is." Grace's heart leaped. "Truly." "You think they would accept me?" "They'd be fools not to," Owen said simply. "You have proper training and experience, more than anyone else in the county. But the distance. How would the children get there? Some could ride, others would board in town during the week. The Miller family has rooms above their dry goods store they'd be willing to let for that purpose." Owen's expression grew earnest. "It would mean days apart sometimes. You'd need to stay in town when weather makes daily travel impossible. I wouldn't ask that of you if you're not comfortable with it." Grace considered the proposition carefully. The chance to teach again called to her deeply, yet she'd grown accustomed to ranch life and the rhythm she and Owen had established. "What do you think I should do?" she asked finally. Owen shook his head. "This isn't my decision to make. You're my wife, not my possession. If teaching would make you happy, then that's what matters." His response cemented Grace's growing affection for him. Many husbands, especially in this frontier setting, would have simply forbidden such an arrangement as inconvenient. "I'd like to try," she decided. "Perhaps 3 days a week to start. See how many students we might gather." Owen nodded, looking pleased. "I'll speak to Reverend Johnson about using the schoolhouse. Maybe we can have everything arranged before harvest season." Thunder rumbled closer and fat raindrops began pattering on the porch roof. Owen stood, offering his hand to help Grace up. As they moved inside, lightning illuminated the valley in a brilliant flash. "Storm's going to be a big one," Owen observed, closing the door against the strengthening wind. That night, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder shook the house, Grace and Owen found comfort in each other's arms. Their lovemaking had a new quality, a celebration of partnership and mutual respect that transcended physical pleasure. Afterward, as Owen slept beside her, Grace watched lightning flash across the room, counting the seconds until thunder followed to gauge the storm's distance. The delay grew longer with each flash, the storm moving away, leaving renewed life in its wake as the parched land drank deeply. By September, the school was established with 12 regular students ranging in age from 6 to 16. Grace divided them into groups based on their abilities rather than age, finding that some of the older ranch children had received almost no formal education, while younger ones from town had stronger foundations. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying. Grace found herself falling into bed, exhausted each night she spent at the ranch, but with a sense of purpose restored. Owen supported her efforts completely, often riding into town on Friday afternoons to escort her home for the weekend. These weekend reunions took on a special sweetness. Owen would arrive at the schoolhouse just as Grace was dismissing her students, his tall figure in the doorway bringing a flutter to her heart each time. They would ride home side by side, sharing news of their respective weeks. One such Friday in early October, as they rode through forests ablaze with autumn colors, Owen seemed unusually quiet. "Is something wrong?" Grace asked finally, guiding Penny alongside Owen's mount. He hesitated before answering. "Received a letter yesterday. My sister Elizabeth is widowed. Influenza took her husband last month." "Oh, Owen, I'm so sorry," Grace said, immediately concerned by the pain in his voice. "She's asking to come west," Owen continued. "Has 2 young children and no means of support now. Her husband's family blames her for his death, somehow foolishness born of grief, I expect." "Of course she must come," Grace said without hesitation. "The ranch house has room and I would welcome the company." Owen's shoulders relaxed visibly. "I hoped you'd feel that way. I've already written back offering her a home with us, but wanted to discuss it properly when you returned. When might they arrive?" "Not until spring, likely. Winter travel across the mountains is too dangerous, especially with young children." Owen's expression softened. "Thank you, Grace. Family is important." "Your family is my family now," Grace replied simply. As they crested the final rise before the ranch came into view, Owen reined his horse to a stop. Grace halted beside him, wondering at the delay. "I have something for you," Owen said, reaching into his saddlebag. He withdrew a small wooden box, smoothly polished and carved with a pattern of wildflowers. "Made it myself. Been working on it evenings while you're in town." Grace accepted the box with surprise, running her fingers over the intricate carving. "It's beautiful." "Open it," Owen urged. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a silver locket on a delicate chain. Grace lifted it carefully, opening the tiny clasp to find a miniature pressed wildflower preserved under glass. "It's a forget-me-not," Owen explained, sounding almost shy. Found it by the creek where we watched the stars our wedding night. Tears pricked at Grace's eyes, not tears of sorrow like those she'd arrived with, but of profound emotion. Will you help me put it on? Owen dismounted and came to assist her down from Penny. His fingers were gentle as he fastened the chain around her neck, the locket coming to rest just below her collarbone. "Perfect," he murmured, his hands lingering on her shoulders. Grace looked up into his face, seeing emotions there that matched her own. "Thank you for this and for everything." "I have something else to tell you," Owen said, his voice taking on a different quality. "I've been waiting for the right moment." A shout from the direction of the ranch interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Pete was riding toward them at a gallop, waving urgently. "Boss, Mrs. Westbrook," he called as he drew near. Fire in the north pasture. Lightning strike from last night's storm must have smoldered under a log. Owen's demeanor changed instantly from tender husband to decisive rancher. "How bad?" "Just starting to spread, but the wind's picking up," Pete reported grimly. "Eliza's gathering buckets. I've sent the Johnsons' boy to alert the neighbors." "We'll need everyone," Owen said, already swinging back into his saddle. He looked down at Grace. "This could get dangerous." "You should. I'm coming," Grace interrupted firmly, remounting Penny. "You'll need every pair of hands." Owen's expression mingled concern with pride. "Stay close to me or Pete. If I tell you to get clear, you ride for the creek, understand?" Grace nodded, heart pounding as they urged their horses toward the ranch at a gallop. She could see it now, a plume of smoke rising from beyond the northern ridge, gray against the blue October sky. The next hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Grace found herself part of a bucket line, passing water from the creek to the advancing fire line. Neighbors arrived in waves, bringing more hands, shovels, and wet blankets to beat at the flames. Men with axes cut fire breaks while others battled the advancing wall of fire directly. Grace's arms ached, her lungs burned from smoke, and sweat plastered her hair to her face, but she worked without complaint. This was her home now, her land, her community. The threat to one was a threat to all. Owen moved among the firefighters like a general commanding troops, his voice carrying over the roar of flames and the shouts of the workers. His face was blackened with soot, his clothes singed in places, yet he never slowed, never showed fatigue. As dusk approached, the wind mercifully died down and the collective efforts began to gain ground against the fire. By full dark, only isolated pockets still burned, carefully monitored by rotating watches of tired men. Grace found Owen sitting on a fallen log, drinking water from a canteen. His hands were blistered, his eyes red-rimmed from smoke. "You should get back to the house," he said hoarsely when he saw her. "Get some rest." Instead, Grace sat beside him, taking his hands in hers and examining the burns. "These need treatment." "Later," Owen dismissed. "Pete thinks we lost about 20 acres of grazing land. Could have been much worse." "It could have," Grace agreed, "but it wasn't, thanks to you and everyone who came to help." Owen shook his head. "That's how it works out here. No one survives alone." Looking around at the exhausted but triumphant faces of their neighbors, Grace understood more deeply than ever what Owen had been trying to teach her since her arrival. The West demanded cooperation, mutual support, and sacrifice. In return, it offered a freedom and sense of belonging that she had never known in Boston. "What were you going to tell me?" she asked suddenly, remembering their interrupted conversation. Before Pete brought news of the fire, Owen smiled tiredly. "It'll keep until morning." It wasn't until the next day, after the last neighbors had departed and the remaining hot spots had been thoroughly doused, that Owen returned to their conversation. They sat on their porch swing, bodies aching from the firefighting efforts but spirits buoyed by their success. About what I was going to say yesterday, Owen began, taking Grace's hand in his. I wanted to tell you. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. I know our marriage began as a practical arrangement. You needed security, I needed a partner for this ranch. Grace nodded, unsure where he was heading. But these past months, watching you adapt to this life, seeing your strength and determination, Grace, I find myself feeling more than I expected to feel. His voice dropped lower, almost shy. I believe I'm falling in love with you. The simple declaration stole Grace's breath. They had built a partnership, yes, even a friendship, but neither had spoken of love before this moment. You don't need to say anything in return, Owen added quickly. I just wanted you to know. Grace reached up to touch the locket at her throat, the tangible symbol of Owen's growing affection. I think perhaps I've been falling in love with you too, she admitted softly. Not all at once, but day by day, smile by smile. The joy that transformed Owen's tired face was beautiful to behold. He pulled her gently into his arms, his kiss conveying all the emotion his words had begun to express. We're building something good here, he whispered against her hair. Something that will last. As winter descended on Whitetail Ranch, bringing deep snows and bitter cold, Grace discovered new aspects of frontier life. The isolation intensified as travel became difficult, sometimes impossible. School sessions were suspended during the worst weather, leaving Grace at the ranch for weeks at a stretch. Yet she found unexpected contentment in this quiet season. The long evenings provided time for reading aloud by lamplight poetry and novels that transported them beyond their snowbound valley. Owen proved to have a good singing voice, teaching Grace ballads and folk songs from his Pennsylvania childhood. They prepared for Elizabeth's arrival, converting the spare bedroom into a cheerful space for the children with handmade quilts and toy animals, Owen carved from pine scraps. Grace sewed curtains and cushion covers, determined to make her sister-in-law feel welcome. Christmas brought a special warmth to the ranch house. They couldn't travel to town for services, but Owen read the nativity story from Grace's mother's Bible. They exchanged simple gifts, a knitted scarf from Grace, a hand-tooled leather journal from Owen. The Simmonses joined them for a feast of roast venison and pumpkin pie, followed by carols around the fire. As January turned to February, Grace began experiencing unexpected fatigue and morning nausea. At first, she attributed it to winter confinement, but as the symptoms persisted, another possibility arose in her mind. One evening, as they sat by the fire working on their respective tasks, Owen repairing a bridle, Grace darning socks, she gathered her courage. Owen, she began carefully, I believe I might be, with child, his hands stilled, the leather strap forgotten in his fingers. Are you certain? Grace shook her head. Not entirely, but it's been 10 weeks since. She blushed slightly. And I've been feeling quite unwell in the mornings. Owen set aside his work and moved to kneel before her chair, taking both her hands in his. A baby, he whispered, wonder filling his voice. Our baby. The joy in his expression melted any anxiety Grace had felt about sharing her suspicion. If I'm right, the child would come in late summer. Perfect timing, Owen said, smiling. After spring calving but before harvest. His expression grew serious. How are you feeling about this? Truly, Grace considered the question honestly. Nervous, she admitted. Having a baby so far from doctors and family is frightening. Eliza has helped deliver most of the children born in this valley, Owen reassured her. And we'll make sure you see Doc Peterson in town as soon as the pass is clear. But I'm also happy, Grace continued. Happier than I thought possible when I stepped off that stagecoach last spring. Owen brought her hands to his lips, kissing them reverently. From tears to smiles, he murmured, just as I promised. Grace touched his cheek gently. "We've built much more than smiles, Owen. We've built a life together." As winter slowly released its grip on the land, new life stirred everywhere: calves in the pastures, chicks in the henhouse, green shoots pushing through the soil in Eliza's garden. Grace's body changed too, her slender frame gradually rounding with the child growing within. May brought the long-anticipated arrival of Elizabeth Westbrook Anderson and her children, 7-year-old Thomas and 4-year-old Margaret. The family resemblance between the siblings was striking. Elizabeth had Owen's dark hair and serious demeanor, though grief had left shadows beneath her eyes. The children were initially shy but quickly warmed to ranch life. Thomas followed Owen everywhere, solemnly absorbing lessons about cattle and horses. Little Margaret became Grace's shadow, helping with cooking and gardening with the enthusiastic inefficiency of a 4-year-old. Elizabeth herself seemed to grow stronger with each passing week, the mountain air and purposeful work gradually restoring her spirits. She proved to be an excellent baker, her bread and pies quickly becoming legendary among neighboring ranches. "You've created something special here," Elizabeth told Grace one evening as they sat shelling peas on the porch. "When Owen's letters first mentioned taking a mail-order bride, I worried for him. For you both." Grace smiled, her hand absently caressing her swollen belly. "So did I. I came west out of desperation, not hope." "And now?" Elizabeth asked, looking around at the prospering ranch. "Now I can't imagine being anywhere else," Grace replied honestly. "This land gets into your blood. The challenges make the rewards sweeter somehow." "Owen is different too," Elizabeth observed. "Growing up, he was always so serious, carrying the weight of the world. There's a lightness in him now. You've given him that." "We've given it to each other," Grace corrected gently. As summer progressed, Grace's teaching duties were temporarily assumed by a young man from Cheyenne, allowing her to focus on preparing for the baby's arrival. Owen insisted she rest during the hottest part of the day, often bringing wildflowers or small treats to tempt her appetite when morning sickness persisted. The entire community anticipated the birth with excitement. Neighboring women organized a quilting bee that was really an excuse to gift Grace with handmade baby clothes, blankets, and practical advice. Mrs. Miller presented a beautiful cradle that her husband had crafted from cherry wood. "First baby born to new settlers is special," she explained. "Represents the future of this valley." August arrived with unrelenting heat that made Grace uncomfortable and restless. She was sitting on the porch one evening, hoping to catch a breeze, when the first pains began subtle tightening that gradually increased in intensity. "Owen," she called, trying to keep her voice calm. "I think it's time." The next 12 hours tested Grace's endurance beyond anything she had previously experienced. Eliza and Elizabeth stayed by her side throughout, their steady presence anchoring her through waves of pain that threatened to overwhelm her courage. Owen was banished to the barn by tradition, though he appeared at the bedroom door so frequently with offers of fresh water or clean towels that Eliza finally threatened to tie him to a fence post if he didn't stop pacing. Just as dawn broke over the eastern ridge, sending golden light streaming through the bedroom window, Grace gave a final tremendous push and was rewarded with the indignant wail of a healthy baby boy. "Look at him," Eliza exclaimed, quickly cleaning and swaddling the infant. Strong lungs and a full head of hair. When the baby was placed in Grace's arms, exhaustion momentarily gave way to overwhelming love. The tiny face, red and wrinkled from the ordeal of birth, was the most beautiful sight she had ever beheld. "Owen should come now," she whispered. Elizabeth opened the door, and Owen practically fell into the room in his haste. His expression as he approached the bed was one of awe and terror in equal measure. "We have a son," Grace told him, her voice rough from hours of labor. "Come meet him." Owen sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his big hands looking impossibly large next to the swaddled infant. When Grace placed the baby in his arms, tears glistened in his eyes. "He's perfect," Owen murmured, gently touching the downy dark hair that already showed signs of his own curls. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names during the long winter evenings but had never settled on a final choice. Now, looking at the tiny face, Grace knew. "Daniel," she said. "After my father, Daniel Owen Westbrook." Owen nodded, clearly moved by her choice to honor both families. "Daniel," he repeated softly. "Welcome to Whitetail Ranch, son. You've got quite a heritage to grow into." As Eliza and Elizabeth quietly left the room to give the new family privacy, Owen carefully returned Daniel to Grace's arms. Then he leaned forward to place a tender kiss on her forehead. "You amaze me," he said simply. "From the moment you stepped off that stagecoach with nothing but your courage and a carpetbag, you've shown more strength than anyone I've ever known." Grace smiled tiredly. "We've both come a long way since then." "I meant what I said that first day," Owen continued, his voice husky with emotion. "About building smiles together. I didn't know then how much joy we'd find." Looking down at their son, then up at the man she had come to love deeply, Grace felt tears well in her eyes, not tears of sorrow or fear, but of profound gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. "From tears to smiles," she whispered. "And now to laughter and love." Owen bent to kiss her properly, a promise of devotion in the gentle press of his lips against hers. Beyond the window, the sun rose fully over Whitetail Ranch, illuminating the land they had tamed together, a kingdom built from nothing but hope, hard work, and the courage to begin again. 5 years later, Grace stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching as Owen taught their son Daniel to ride his own pony, a gentle, dappled creature with patient eyes. Little Sarah, their 3-year-old daughter, sat securely in front of Elizabeth on a larger mare, her delighted giggles carrying across the yard. The ranch had prospered beyond their early hopes. The cattle herd now numbered over 500 head, and Owen had added sheep as a secondary enterprise. The original log house had been enlarged with a proper addition of sawn lumber, providing comfortable rooms for Elizabeth and her children, as well as the growing Westbrook family. The school in town had become a permanent institution, with Grace teaching 3 days each week during good weather. 28 students now attended regularly, including Thomas and the older ranch children. Grace had established a small library corner with books donated by Eastern relatives and friends, nurturing a love of reading in her frontier pupils. Elizabeth had found unexpected happiness as well, recently accepting a proposal from Whitetail Creek's new blacksmith, a widower with a quiet manner and skilled hands, who had courted her with respectful patience. As Grace watched her family, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her west. The desperate young woman who had arrived with nothing but tears and a carpetbag seemed almost a stranger now, someone she remembered with compassion, but could no longer fully understand. The sound of hoofbeats announced Owen's approach. He dismounted in one fluid motion, lifting Daniel from his pony with proud hands. "Did you see me, Mama?" Daniel called excitedly. "I rode all by myself." "I saw," Grace affirmed, smiling at her son's achievement. "You're becoming quite the horseman." Owen came to stand beside her, his arm slipping naturally around her waist. At 37, his face carried more lines than when they'd met, but his eyes held a contentment that deepened his handsomeness. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, noticing her contemplative mood. Grace leaned into his embrace. "I was just thinking about beginnings, about arriving here with nothing and finding everything." Owen's arm tightened around her. Best decision I ever made, placing that advertisement. Even when I stepped off that stagecoach in tears, Grace teased gently. Especially then, Owen replied, his voice growing serious. Your tears showed me your honesty, your willingness to begin again despite heartbreak. He pressed a kiss to her temple. I didn't know it then, but I started falling in love with you that very day. Grace turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his beloved face. Then we truly have built smiles together, just as you promised. And so much more, Owen agreed, bending to kiss her properly. From the paddock, Daniel called for them to watch another riding feat. Sarah's laughter mingled with the gentle lowing of cattle in the nearby field. The afternoon sun gilded the valley in golden light, turning Whitetail Ranch into a painting of paradise. This was their kingdom, built from nothing but hope and hard work, a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. From tears to smiles, from strangers to beloved partners, their journey had only just begun.